Welcome to day 3 of the 12 Days of Christmas Cards series. This is Elena with Black Sheep 303 Creative, and today's project is a Christmas Village trifold card. I made it using the Art Impressions Village trifold stamp set, and then a lot of coloring along with the Zig Real Clean Color Real Brush Markers. So the stamp set comes with some great instructions. They're generally very, very clear. So they tell you to create a cardstock base at 5 1/4 by 11 inches long and then score it at 3 5/8 from each side. But you don't fold it until the end. Then it tells you how to stamp the stamps. The village goes in the middle section on the back at a 1/2 inch from the top, and I did draw a light pencil line to help me with that. And then the snowman goes on the right panel on the front, and it's at 1 1/4 inches from the top. And then the bench is on the left-hand panel, and that goes at 1 1/2 inches from the top of the card. And I did draw light pencil lines to help me get correct placement. Another thing I wanted to mention about this stamp set is that the stamps are cling mount, which is great, but they are very organically shaped. So it was a little tricky to get them to stamp straight. So here's my method that I came up with that worked very well. So I wanted taking an element in each stamp and lining it up parallel to the edge of my block. So with the snowman, it was the lamppost. And so then when I stamped it down, I used the edge of the block and the score line, as well as the top of the block and the pencil line, to make sure I was getting it straight up and down. So then, like for the bench, I used the tree that was in the middle, that's straight up and down, to run that parallel to the edge of the block. And then again, stamped it down, making sure that the block was along the score line, and then the top, or the top of the stamp at least, was parallel to or perpendicular to that pencil line that I drew. I stamped all of it in Memento Tuxedo black ink because that is waterproof-ish. It's impervious to, it doesn't run with markers essentially. And it doesn't run with Copics or Spectrum Noirs, and it also doesn't run with Zigs either. So even though Zigs are water-based and Copics and Spectrum Noirs are alcohol-based, it works with either. So I was very happy to find that out. Now, as I mentioned, this card has a lot, and I mean a lot of coloring. However, with that said, the result is, if I do say so myself, spectacular. I'm not saying, oh wow, I'm such a great colorist, look at my result. I'm just more saying that the products are great. So like the markers as well as the stamp set are so easy to work with that it creates a really, really great result in the end. And so for that, I was incredibly impressed. And I am not really a traditional Christmassy village card person, just personally. I think they're really pretty, but they're not the style of card that I normally send. But this, I think, in the end, was just amazing, and I love it. And so I think it's for like a special card for someone at Christmas, maybe like you could do 1 or 2, because this is probably about 45 minutes to an hour worth of coloring. So you couldn't really make 50 to 100 of them. It would just be impractical. But as a special card for like your mother or, your grandma or something, this would be well worth the effort. Or you could just view it as like a coloring exercise. Like if you're into adult coloring and you want to color a Christmas scene, this is a great thing to do. And it's really fun, and it has a really cute result in the end, especially with the trifold action that you will see later. Now, I do list all of the colors that I use for each specific item on the supply list. There's a link to the supply list in the video description below. You can also find it on the post, which links you to the blog post at my website. And so I tried to be pretty clear and say, like, on the lamppost, I use these colors. On the snowman's hat, I use these colors, et cetera, et cetera. So that if you really want to try to reproduce exactly how I'm coloring, that information is available to you. But I wanted to take this time to talk a little bit about how I color to hopefully help you if you're intimidated by the idea of trying this. So I generally start the same way with all of my markers. So whether it's Spectrum Noirs, Copics, or these, I tend to pick, so I will go and pick, say, 3 to 4 different shades in a color family to of like from light to dark to use to create shadows and depth. So I start off with the lightest shade and I will lay down a base coat like you see here. Then I will take the next darkest shade and then like the third darkest shade and add shadows. And generally I will add sort of a larger shadow with the medium shade and then go over that same shadow just in a thinner way with the darkest shade. And then I will blend it entirely out using the lightest shade. And sometimes I will go back and forth several times doing that till I get the depth that I need. But that is basically my technique for coloring with markers and getting a decent blend. I don't always want a perfect blend, but that is a great way to, at least as a beginner step, to start with these with any kind of markers, really, especially markers that are designed to blend the way these are, Spectrum Noirs are, Copics are. Those are all designed to create like a smooth blend and blend together. Another tip that I would like to share would be if you're concerned about colors, like, you need to have, say you have something on the front to color and something to color on the inside of a card, and it seems like they don't really go together once you're done. My way of getting around that's super easy, is just be consistent in the markers that you use. So, for example, in the snowman scene, I used the same greens that I'm using here for the wreath as I am for the trees. Now there is a little bit of variation, but not much. It's basically the same colors. Then like the lamppost is the exact same combination of markers that I'm using for this bench. So just all on its own, that creates consistency between the two scenes. And then when I add some ornaments onto this tree, I will use the same reds that I used like on the bow and in the wreath from the snowman. Same with like the yellows are very close to the yellows I used in the lamppost light. And the snow combination, which I love and was just an accident. It's actually 91 light gray and 92 gray blue. That is consistent across all 3 of the settings. So I use the exact same marker combination for the snow. And then for my village, I'm again using basically the same colors that I used on the other 2 scenes, just potentially with maybe a slightly darker variation. Like maybe I went 1 shade darker because this is like a night scene. But like the red and the blue houses in the village are essentially the same reds and blues from the snowman on the front of the card. So without even doing anything else, that all on its own creates consistency between the scenes. So that's kind of a good thing if you're uncertain of like what colors to use between, say, the front of the card and the inside of the card. Just go with that. If you use 3 purples on the front, use the same purples or at least 2 of them on the inside to keep your color choices consistent, and you'll have a card that seems to work together just very easily and all on its own. Now, the village is probably the most amount of coloring here. It's very, very detailed. The brush tips on these markers are great for that because if you use very light pressure, you can get a very, very thin line and get into really, really tiny spaces. If you push down on them, you can color in a greater space pretty easily, and that's one nice thing about these markers. And they're also very forgiving, like they blend together very easily. So here's where I actually use these literally as watercolors. So I'm coloring the markers right onto my craft sheet, and then I'm taking my brush and I'm getting water from my cup that's off camera and adding it to the color on the craft sheet, and then I'm just coloring it directly onto the paper. And this isn't even watercolor paper. This is just plain old cardstock. Now, I did get some buckling as a result of that, but it was no big deal. And this actually worked out really, really well. So you can see on like the road, one thing I did was I just took my brush and I went sort of horizontal across the paper to get those like shadows in the road that are kind of more straight across. And then for the sky, I'm being a lot more random and organic in the blending of those colors. And these are all like, it's like a gray and two blues to create this dark sky. Now, I think anybody who's a really, really good watercolorist probably wouldn't like my technique, and I am not a great watercolorist by any stretch, nor do I have a lot of experience with it. But I did use a fair amount of water on this, and I do get a lot of blooms of the color as I add it to the water on the page. I think generally watercolorists don't want to do that, but for this, and especially for the sky, it worked really well. At least, it's kind of a happy accident. So going back to the instructions, you need to cut out the scenes on the front and the middle. It tells you to start at 1.5 inches from the base and then cut along the edge of the snowman and the bench and then straight up along the score line to create your trifold so that it folds correctly on top of each other and creates a scene even when it's closed. Now you have a choice. You can detail cut along the edge of each element that you're cutting out, which is what I did. And don't worry, you don't have to watch all of it. That does take a while, but it does look really nice. However, I do think you could probably just cut along and leave a white border, and it would, in all likelihood, look just as good. Like, I'm not sure the detail cutting along the edge is 100% necessary. I think you could do it with just a border and it would be just as good. Now, I did cheat a little bit on that front panel because I had a big smudge of ink on the right-hand side, and so I cut it down on a diagonal, which I don't think hurt anything, although I did have to put a little repositionable glue or like a dot there just to keep it closed for mailing. Now, I mounted the entire thing onto a piece of Stampin' Up! Real Red cardstock, and it for two reasons. First, it helped straighten out the warping that I got from the watercoloring on the back panel, and then it just adds a really, really pretty border to the whole scene, and I really liked it for that reason. Now, you can see I used my Signo white gel pen to add stars to the sky, as well as some detailing on the snowman, and I used my Wink of Stella and my Spectrum Noir clear glitter markers to add glitter to various parts of the card, and there's a lot of glitter on it. You may not be able to tell here, but it looks great. Like, I glittered up all the snow and some of the other white accents, and there you can see a good look at the scene. And that's a really good close-up of the night sky. I was super proud of how that came out, so I'm not bragging, I swear. It was a happy accident. And there you can see some of the shading on the snowman, and that is the completed card. If you have not tried these trifold sets, this was my first time trying them, I think it's a really cute idea, and especially if you enjoy coloring, it's a great way and sort of an ingenious idea to make a very, very special card for someone. So I'd encourage you to give that a shot if you haven't. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you stopping by my Christmas card series. As I mentioned, there is a supply list link below in the video description. Happy holidays. I hope to see you tomorrow for day 4.